Hello, my name is Vicky Wishay, episode 61 of A Wealthy Life, and we're going to be talking about getting started in property, how I did it. And I think this is a poignant time to sort of get into these details. Again, you can read about this in my books because that tends to be what my books were about, my experiences. And it was the very first book I wrote using other people's money, how to invest in property, back in 2010, I think. Goodness me, that first edition, a long time ago, where I actually talked through that process. And I used the title Using Other People's Money because that was the way we started. So just on our own, Bob and I would have had half the amount of money that we had in the pot. And we could have started out that way. But it just so happened that when I went on my very first property training course, I told my sister and my brother-in-law, and they came along. And in the end, we formed a family partnership, a family group. We all contributed the same investment level. We agreed a common investment strategy. Why is it important for you to understand this? I suppose because this is real, not theory. It's not get rich quick. We're talking about starting out investing in property. Nikki, my sister, and I had originally bought some flats with the help of a property sourcer back in 2004. So we're talking about starting 18 years ago and then really getting into it in detail, probably 14 or so years ago. So sort of 2007, early 2008 for the training. So a different time, a lot less legislation, I'll tell you that. There was no Section 24, which has forced everybody into buying into limited companies. So we did all the buying in personal names. There was no, I think, Article 4, which limits houses of multiple occupancy. None of that was there. You certainly didn't have to be part of the immigration service by checking on whether tenants had the right to rent. But there are things that I think came in fairly early on, which made sense. So we did our property training. Some of our property training was with what was called the NLA, now the NLRA, National Landlords Residential Association. You will, in every country, have some sort of professional property body that mitigates on your behalf and campaigns with Parliament for you, I would imagine. And that's the agent that we used. And we did that property training in terms of understanding the laws. We wanted to understand the Decent Homes Act. We wanted to understand the Housing Act. We wanted to understand Section 8, Section 21, and so on. So we did all of that with a proper professional body. But our initial journey into property was via one of these training companies where they sort of get 60 or more people in the room. They upsell them onto a weekend course, and from the weekend course, they hard upsell you onto a much larger program, usually costing something like 20 or more grand. And there were 4 of us. You do the maths. So what did that do for us, that training that cost us 20 grand? I suppose it took us through all the theory. I have spoken to people some 15 years later, and they're still following exactly the same format. They are a machine that churns people in and out. They change their company name on a regular basis. And it's a business that is about training people about the theory of property. It was never really about helping people create their strategy, and it was never really about helping people be successful, because although they offered mentors, you were very much in a bigger group. I think it's important that you understand that, because your journey into property, and if you're starting to listen to property podcasts like this one and the wealth podcasts and that type of thing, is it will be very easy for you to get caught up by companies that are exceptional at their marketing but don't necessarily always follow through. And I think you've got to say to yourself, what is it that I need to understand? And I don't know what I needed to understand right at the beginning, but with the advantages of hindsight, I can go back and I can look at it and I can say what we needed was a strategy. And the strategy is, why do we want to, and I'm going to use the word risk our money by investing in property? What are we expecting it to do for us in return? And because, as my experience as a university lecturer, I had done a lot of business strategy with students, we sat down as a family group at the kitchen around the table with a flip chart. And as I said to you, we created a common strategy. We knew that what we wanted to do was to invest in property. Luckily, as a family group, we'd all done the same training courses. So we had a common language. We had a common understanding of the theories and the techniques of how to invest in property. So it made the conversation quite easy and this process quite quick. I think that if you're going to work with your family, whether you're going to involve your parents by going up or your siblings by going out to the side, making absolute sure that the words that you use hold the same meaning for everyone is really, really important. And writing that down, we had a written strategy document, a partnership agreement. We talked about how much money we would each put in. We talked about what our goals were in terms of the getting our money out as our ongoing cash flow, because that's what we wanted, was cash flow as a strategy. And then we talked about the techniques that we might use. We looked at 3 beds buy to let was our principal technique, but then we also considered that we might look at HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy. And we listed the properties and we talked about what would happen if any one of the 4 of us wanted to leave. We had mutual wills. We had, it's sometimes called key man insurance or key person insurance. And this is where you take out insurance that covers the business for the loss of one person. So what we did was we insured each of our lives for the total value of the mortgages that we had at that time. Then as we increased the portfolio, we knew that we had, say, 50% coverage or whatever else. But at the time, we had 100% coverage of the mortgages. So if any one person died prematurely, and we got all the way to the end of the partnership and nobody died, luckily, but we took out the insurance to say that if any one of us died, their insurance policy would pay out to their family and the rest of the portfolio would stay with the remaining living partners, because what we didn't want to do was then have to chop the portfolio up, sell properties in order to pay out an inheritance when the market might not be right. And I think that's very important to think about, the exit. How are you going to get out of this in the long run? What do you want to get out of it in the meantime? And how are you going to get out of it in the long run? And that is a very key conversation that I think is vital if you're going to create a partnership that you need to have. But even if you're not going to create a partnership, I think it's a conversation worth having with yourself. What do I want to get out of investing in property? And at some point, do I foresee myself wanting to get out of owning these properties, and what would my exit strategy be? I personally don't see myself ever selling all the properties. I see myself keeping those and then passing them on through my inheritance, because why would I sell them when A, they're going to continue providing me with cash flow, because that's my technique, but also no one will ever be able to buy them as cheaply as I bought them in the first place. So once we'd agreed all of that, only then did we start to look at properties that we wanted to buy. Now, to put this into perspective, we first started buying as the family group. So I said, my sister and I was originally back in 2004. Then we did a period of remortgaging. And I spoke to you about that last week, about buy to hold, buy to sell, when to remortgage and for what purpose. We remortgaged some of the properties that we bought in 2004 specifically to release capital that would then go into this next buying phase. And this next buying phase was going to replace the lost income through the remortgage and give us more cash flow. So the overall pot would grow. Interest rates at the time were as they are now. We were coming out of a mad property increase in values. I think we've just had a moderate increase in values recently. And I think that we were definitely, although we didn't know it at the time, heading into a really difficult financial time. It was 2007, 2008 was when all of the banks in America were crashing. In the UK, we had people queued up outside Northern Rock trying to get their money back out of a building society. Interest rates were around 5%. We've got some of those indicators now, in that we've had a couple of American banks struggle and we've got high interest rates. But what we haven't seen that we did back then is a clamp down on the money. The reason we had high interest rates back in 2008 was because the banks themselves lost confidence. And so the flow of the money was restricted, and that flow was then restricted down to us in the general public, in the general money market. And that meant that not only was money expensive, but money was hard to get hold of. And so then we were in a position where when the money is restricted, it then has an impact in other ways, particularly in the property market. We haven't got that this time, but a lot of the other indicators are there. So 2008 through to about 2010, I would say, I was buying on average 1 to 2 properties a month, either for our own portfolio and then later on as I started my sourcing business. And I'll explain that to you in a minute. But during that period, we were buying 1 to 2 properties a month. That means that you are in there in the property market. You have the relationship with the estate agents. You know the houses in the streets, in the postcodes that you're looking at. You see who comes to market. You see how quickly they sell. You see what price they were asking and what price they achieve, partly because in those days I would have that relationship with the estate agents and ask. So it's a very vibrant, very active, very involved period. During that period and towards the end of it, just to finish off our buying phase, we had used up the money that we originally as a group put in to our foursome partnership, if you like. And then I had a conversation with my parents, which I discuss in detail in the book, Using Other People's Money, to release money from my parents' house to then create another portfolio pot to then buy some more properties again. So still the same technique, still buying roughly 3-bed houses, although I did buy some flats, and mostly buying to hold, although I did have a go, and I've told you about a couple of property examples a couple of episodes ago where we looked to buy to sell and the challenges that came with that. And then we sort of eased a bit. We got to the stage where, as time moved on, we had that solid foundation of cash flow that we were looking for, and we sort of drifted a bit as a family group. So our individual interest changed. We had a number of properties, we had cash flow coming in, and of course the lovely Bob was stuck with me and my passion for property, but the rest of the family group retired from active duty, I think would be a good way to phrase how they stepped back. I carried on. And over the next 5 to 10 years, I worked my way through the different techniques as the market changed. I created a property sourcing business, which is how I then started buying so many properties. And I worked for clients that had the cash to invest, but not necessarily the time or experience. Each of those clients started out with a number of the simple buy-to-lets to create that foundation in their property portfolio business, enabling them with my help to master their business skills and to learn how to manage the portfolio while at the same time running the rest of their lives. Some of them are business owners, some of them are holding down senior positions in other people's companies, and they've got lives and families and hobbies and holidays that they wanted to have. I then moved on and we changed to a different part of the country because, as I said to you, right at the very beginning, as a family group, we'd looked at 3-bed HMOs, sorry, 3-bed houses as our strategy. But then we also thought about HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy. And they just did not work in the Northwest. And the reason for that is that, if you like, the microeconomics of the area and the government support that you can get in the UK in terms of housing benefits and income support and everything else meant that if you were a family or if you were a single parent with children, you could basically fund living in a premise yourself. In that area, it was easier to live in a 2-bed or a 3-bed house than it was a flat. It wasn't an area that had loads and loads of flats. That wasn't the first choice for families. They typically would move into houses with small yards or gardens, etc. So who would then need to live in flats? So that would be single people that could afford to live in a flat, maybe a 1-bed or a 2-bed. And then who does that leave to live in houses of multiple occupancy? Well, there's the obvious, there's the students, and this was an area that had a number of universities. So yes, there were student HMOs, and they are a very specific group. They arrive at a very specific time of the year, they leave at a very specific time of the year, and depending on the university may well control the housing that the students are, dare I use the word, allowed to go into. And in the Northwest, the universities very clearly marketed what they would call approved landlords. So if you didn't get onto the approved landlord list, you were unlikely to get the students. And it was quite a busy marketplace when we looked at it. So we then thought, well, there are other single people, maybe single people that can't afford flats, or single people that don't want to live completely alone. Maybe they would live in shared houses. But the further north you go, and certainly in some cities generally in the UK, the areas of deprivation mean that there are people that have a lot of issues. So there are drug issues, there are alcohol issues, there are growing mental health issues. And if you are not working in partnership with a very specific charity or agency or government body that will be supporting these people, creating a house of even 4 bedrooms in which you put a couple of drug addicts and a couple of alcoholics, or a couple of alcoholics and a couple of people with severe mental health issues, without the support of social workers, because that can happen, is actually a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for disaster in so many ways, in that you as the landlord will not be able to support your tenants. Your tenants will not be in a position to support themselves and act as a reasonable adult in the other side of the contract. You're contracting with your tenants. I'm going to lend you my property. In return, you're going to pay me the rent, but I am going to maintain it to appropriate standards, and you are going to treat it with an appropriate level of respect so that it remains a decent place to live in. It's not always possible for people with a lot of other more complex issues, like dealing with alcohol, dealing with a drug addiction, or dealing with mental health issues to be able to deal with that level of, if you like, social sophistication on their own. And this was what we would have faced had we moved into HMOs in this area. And so we didn't do that. However, I did then find an area where it was much easier to get into the student market and even the young professional market. So by that, I mean people that have left universities, that are in their first jobs, they're testing out the job market. They're not sure if this is where they want to put down roots. They've sort of stayed here because this is roughly either where the university was that they lived in, or is roughly where the profession that they think that they want to work in is based. So they're in a temporary position. They may stay 6 months, they may stay 12 months, but you know that these young professionals, because they're aspirational, will move on and move off. They and the students are able to enter into the sort of contract you want. So I developed a model of HMOs that involved us buying very specifically 3-bedroom houses that had a specific floor plan, and there were 2 floor plans that we looked for. We would then convert them into 4-bedroom HMOs. One floor plan let us create 2 en suites and 2 shared bathrooms. So it was a 4-bed, 4-bath house. And the other one was a 1 bed was en suite, and then 3 beds shared one property. And of course, that attracted different rates for each of the rooms. When we were first buying, and I would say this is probably 2012, maybe that sort of an area, 2012, 2013, I could buy the properties at under £100,000 for a 3-bed house. And the room rate per person per week was £120. So we could get £120 per person per room, because we put 1 person in per room, per week, and we had a 4-bed house, so we could easily get 480 for the house per week. And as I say, a purchase price of 100,000, even when we factored in the amount of work that we did on the properties, was frequently stripping them back, if not all the way back to brick, depending on the condition they were in, certainly back to plaster, and putting in the kitchens and the bathrooms and the bedrooms and the plumbing and redecorating and carpets and everything else, curtains, and of course furnishing an HMO, because you need to supply them furnished. Even when we factored in all those costs, it was an extremely good model. 4 years into the model, and the market had changed. We were now looking at easily 140,000 per property to purchase, plus then all of our refurbishment costs, and the room rates themselves had dropped down to £90 per person per week. And this was caused by an oversupply of rooms. The introduction then came with Article 4, and that changed and limited the area completely. It contained the number of houses of multiple occupancy you could have in the area. And I think for most people living close to a university, that then becomes dominated by a student population that sees them all leave at the beginning of the summer, and then your village or your small town shrinks in terms of the capacity of the people. If the houses are then being used as houses of multiple occupancy for your young people at university, where are the homes for the young families going to live? And then what are the schools going to do if they don't have children? What are the demands on the doctors going to be, and so on and so forth? It changes the nature of an area. And I do think that there is probably a fine balance between how many students you have live out in the community and how many students are housed within specific university supplied dorms. But there is an opportunity, and I think you have to understand the university, the education, and don't forget the university is very clearly a property owner themselves, their property strategies before you get into that market. But it worked really well for us. As I say, the prices changed, both purchase prices going up and the return that you were getting coming down. So then I went back to working basically into the Northwest, and the simple 3-bed properties again. And so what I'm trying to say to you here is, over the length of time that I have invested in property, I have moved up and down the techniques, backwards and forwards through the techniques as the market changes, as the supply of money and interest rates are there, as the supply and cost of houses are there, as the needs of my clients, as in my tenants, are there. So then I had a little period where we branched into development, and then I came back round, and I mentioned that briefly, where we were looking at doing some bigger developments down on South Coast, but the cost of money and the timing wasn't quite right. So then I pulled back out of those. And then we came back to the foundation of, as I said, straightforward buy-to-lets. I had found myself at a point where I felt I had enough properties. I was quite happy with what I had. I didn't really want to add any more properties to my portfolio, other than occasionally churning a property if something came up. But I found a lot of pleasure in helping other people create their property portfolios, and created a business that generated income, because if I was going to give up my time, then I wanted to get paid for it. And I think I'd reached a point in my portfolio here where I had enough money coming in from our own portfolio that I didn't have to work. So I could then take my time and do with it what I chose. If I was going to then help you invest in property, I want something in return for that. So not doing it for free, doing it for a fee, because I value my knowledge, my experience. You value my knowledge, experience, and my time. And you recognize that getting me to help you invest in property is a better use of your time than you doing it. And so the sourcing business came about. I'd say probably over the most recent 5 years, I've focused on churning our own portfolio. So going through our portfolio, in some cases, releasing the capital that was gained, so that the original family group, we've paid out, we've all doubled our money effectively, and then moved on and got back the original investments. And that was, let me think, how long did they last? That was probably 13 to 14 years. We put our money into that investment and then pulled our money back out. I released some money so that I had some cash for us to do a development at home, and then start again looking at, okay, so now I'm left with these properties. How are they performing? Do I want to add more properties back into the portfolio again? Do I want to add in the same area? Do I want to add in a different area? So that churn, and I do think you need to do that, probably revisit your overall financial strategy every 5 to 10 years. So a light look at 5 years and a more detailed look at 10 years. And that's effectively what we've done. And I suppose if I summarize and look back over my property journey over the last 18 years, I can see that I followed those techniques exactly as I described them to you last week in episode 60. I built that foundation of buy-to-let properties. And in my case, that provided the income so that I no longer had to worry about holding down a job. And eventually, after doing some remortgages and refinancing and sorting that all out, and it was in a good position, I used my experience, my market knowledge, my contacts, and combined that with my own very specific past as a university lecturer and a trained NLP coach to create my own other business, if you like, about helping other people invest in property. So some of it was about teaching people how to invest in property because they wanted to learn, and some of it was simply doing the work for them. And now I've combined those things together for most clients. There are still some that just purely want to learn, and that's absolutely fine. They become mentees. But for the bulk of my clients, what I do now is work with them, first of all, to ensure that their money mindset is aligned with the goals and the reason that they're coming into property, to make sure that their personal financial habits are aligned with stepping into a property business, which requires taking on debt and investing your good hard-earned cash with some degree of risk. So it needs to be clear that you understand how to run that money. And once we've looked at the whole wealth strategy and what they want to get out of property, I then step into the role as a project manager, and I go out and I find the properties for them, making sure that there is a market in terms of a client, a tenant that wants to live in it, make sure that the numbers work for them, present the numbers, manage through the buying process, and then eventually put them with my team, the lettings team, to manage them. Maybe with a slight refurb, or maybe with a refurb further down the line. And then what I do, which is something that I didn't do originally in the first iteration of the business, is I continue to work with my clients for another year to make sure that they really understand how to run this property business. And I think that's something unique in the property world. I don't think anybody combines the mindset and the money and the wealth strategy at one end with the property sourcing in the middle, which, yes, some people do, and then combine that with the business mentoring at the other end. And it's enabled me to work with people that recognize taking their money and putting it into property is a good idea, but they don't want the steep learning curve of learning how to do it themselves. They want to jump in on my knowledge and my experience, and they're prepared to pay for that. And then they like the support of having a mentor with them, a business mentor with them through on the journey. And that gives me pleasure. I enjoy doing that. So there's a win-win in the partnership. I work with great people, and I have very long relationships. I still work with people that I've been working with since 2012. And we're talking over 10 years now. I've been working with the same clients. So our property journey is really, if you like, kind of want to use the word journey again, but we have traveled through all of the techniques that I talked to you about. I have, and I mentioned the language in the past, looked at things like rent to rent. I've looked at lease options. I've looked at all of those other little nuances, but really what I recognized was that those were techniques that required time. They weren't about money. And I've pulled back and focused on techniques that are about using your money and leveraging it in a way that frees up your time, rather than using your time to create a business to generate a wage and a salary for yourself. So that's how we got started. It was a combination of some of our own money and then going up to our parents and asking our parents for money. And that put us on a path where we could build the solid foundation, check out whether we had the passion. And I would say that I don't think Bob has a passion for property. He's landed with my passion, if you like, but certainly to then recognize that some people will start out investing in property, think it's a great way to make their money work harder, and be quite happy with that as a goal and a be all and an end all, if you like, in its own right. But there are going to be other people that start out investing in property, and as they move through it and they see what it can do for them and they see the potential, and maybe because of some other background interests they have, they may then take that on a bit further. Some of the mentees that I've worked with are looking at setting up their own sourcing businesses. Some of the mentees I've worked with came in with previous building experience and want to move on and have moved on to developments. So everybody is individual, and that's why I like working with people on a one-to-one basis rather than making everybody show up once a month and all do the same thing. So I hope that through this episode, you have been able to follow a journey that isn't a straight line, that both meanders on the horizontal plane and on the vertical plane. So there are ups and downs, which are often dictated by the market. There are slight turns to the left or the right as you see another technique come up and you think, is that something I could do? And you then rule it out and you move back on the path again. That we have very definitely leveraged our own money and leveraged our family money. We've created a solid foundation of cash flow. And then, because of my passion, I've then gone on to explore other ways that I can continue working with property, first through the sourcing business and the teaching business and the HMOs and some developments and so on and so forth. It's such an exciting, is it a profession? Is it a career? Is it a passion? Is it a business? It is so exciting, but then always pull it back down because the spreadsheets work. When you get the spreadsheets out, you can see how the spreadsheets work. So it's exciting because there's so many opportunities, but you always pull it back down to the spreadsheet. Don't ever walk into a property excited. Be excited about the spreadsheet, walk into the property and make sure that it matches your expectation. But I love property, and I can rant on about this for hours, but I am going to stop. I wanted you to understand how you could get started, how I got started, and how there is a journey ahead of you that will be at least 5 to 10 years, maybe 10 to 20 years. And it could be a straightforward, straight line where you have a portfolio that just generates income for you, or it could develop into something more. It could just be a buy to let property business, that's it, or it could be the door to something else. Only you and time will tell. My name is Vicky Wooshea, and I hope that I have been able to put a little bit of whoosh into your life to share some of my passion for property, but with a structure. It's passion within a structure. And I look forward to speaking to you next week, where I'm going to controversially talk to you about flats and why I think they're a bit of a fool's game, even though I have some in my portfolio. I look forward to speaking to you again next week. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe. And the book that I mentioned in this was Using Other People's Money. You can get that through Amazon, Using Other People's Money, How to Invest in Property. And if you don't want the digital copy and you want a paper copy, then drop me an email and I'll let you know how much the postage and packaging is, and then send one off to you. Thank you very much for listening, and I will speak to you next week.